So the disassembly phase starts with the ends here, and these molded on parts are pretty easy to remove for the most part. I'm going to go ahead and start with the disassembly process, and this is basically where you want to take off all the parts that you want to save and modify later. That way they don't get damaged. Parts like this obviously are going to get damaged if I leave them on the model, so they need to come off. So we'll carefully take the end railings off, which are a solid piece, which is very, very nice on these Walthers cars. We'll go ahead and set this aside for modification later. We will have to do some railing work to this and add some parts to it. Same thing with the other end. Just get under it with a chisel blade. Pop the pieces off. And they should just come right off. We will be removing the bay windows. Obviously with this part you have to use a little bit more caution because this is a piece that we're going to be reattaching after modification later on. So just very carefully try to guide this piece off. Now, I always start from the bottom. You're less likely to see scratches and damage like that. However, you will still have to get at the top here and just very carefully take your chisel blade. Try to tackle this at one of the ends if you can. I'm using my very sharp chisel blade here, and I'm just trying to do my best not to damage this piece, but I'm just going to try to carefully wedge under the model here, guide it under, and eventually the bay windows will come off like this. Don't tear them off, just coax them off very, very carefully. Remember, any parts like this we want to keep undamaged. They have to be able to be reattached. We want to try to avoid having to do any kind of surgery on them if we don't need to. So just try to keep that in mind. There we go. The smoke jack will of course be a little bit more difficult to remove, but essentially what I'm going to do here is try to get under it with a pair of pliers and try to basically lift it off the stand. It should actually be able to come off by hand here. If I can try to coax it off. I want to be able to save this part, so we need to be careful. I'm not too worried about the base because I'm basically going to have to extend this piece anyway, so it's all going to have to get modified. But however we get this base off, it's got to come off. There we go. And we'll essentially take this off later, but you'll save the smoke jack for modification later as well. At this rate as well, you can go ahead and unscrew your couplers, remove those, get rid of them. The trucks are optional. You don't have to remove these yet if you don't want to. However, the time will come when we need to remove these, so again, it's totally your call there. For now, I'm just going to leave them on. So with the model completely disassembled within a matter of minutes, we're pretty much ready to go on this project. And this is totally your call here, whatever you want to tackle first. But in a case like this, I recommend you get all of the major body surgery done first on the car before you do any kind of detailing. So in this particular case, with the amount of windows we got to plate, patch, cut, sand, fill, and everything else, I wouldn't be worrying about the end details so much, or underbody details, roof details. All the final touches like that can wait until you get the majority of the body surgery done. You want to make sure you have the majority of the major work done and taken care of before you take care of any small details. Otherwise, you risk breaking them off in the cutting, molding, sanding process, etc. So just keep that in mind, and just, you know, bear that in mind. Like I said, just choose where you want to start with this particular project, but my priority here is to go ahead and start cutting up the sides. So the steps on this model are going to have to be taken off and redone. Fortunately, I can kitbash these steps and basically rework them into more accurate pieces, but the task right now is to get these off the model. And this is another thing I want to go ahead and get off now. That way, when I start cutting up the frame, these don't get damaged in any kind of way, because I actually damaged a set of these steps on the first one I did, and I learned the hard way, and I ended up having to make some new ones from scratch. So I definitely don't want to have to do that again, so I'm just going to try to remove these first before I get these or too heavily into the cutting sides. So how you remove these is essentially you want to get from behind and just kind of scribe into the frame a little bit, basically to kind of cut in some of the material. That way these can kind of just easily snap off. Something like that. And then you just basically kind of, using those cuts, we'll just try to kind of snap this piece off very, very carefully. And it's not really coming out here. Try it this way here. Here we go. This one's being a little bit stubborn, but once we cut that piece, these should just snap off like this. You can see we got it cut, and essentially we got it off. So with the steps cut off now, we need to go ahead and trim this piece, the stock piece of material, down flush with the floor here. And I like to use a nice sharp hobby knife. You can use a chisel blade or the X-Acto. Just take off little bits of material at a time at both ends. Obviously be careful, this is pretty soft plastic, so it's kind of good to get some support, but keep your fingers clear of the blade in case it flies out of your hand or something. Definitely have had that happen before. And then just slowly kind of start taking some of this material off until you get it flush. Okay, so right off the bat we got a problem here, and I just discovered this very quickly. I noticed that the plastic seems to be a lot softer on this particular model compared to some of the older Platinum line models that I had. This is the latest run that they did, and I discovered that the plastic is way too brittle to cut like this. As you can see, I was trying to cut one of these steps up, and it just basically disintegrated. So I can't use this now. Essentially, I'll try to give you an idea what I used to do on the originals. They were really easy to cut, and they were a little bit tougher plastic, so all you would have to do is basically take your X-Acto and peel them back and then basically straighten them out, and then I would take a new piece of styrene, fill in the backing, and then put in the new step. That's how I used to do it, and that's how I was expecting to do it in this project. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do it that way, so we're going to have to do this a bit of a harder way, and that's where our styrene comes in here. I have a gauge of styrene that basically matches the same gauge and width of these steps, and I'm basically going to have to fabricate new steps. So this is essentially the point in time where a straight edge and your sharp X-Acto knife come in handy. So what we're going to have to do is basically measure out strips of styrene, cut them to size, and then basically put them together. So what I'm going to do first, I'll show you one cut to go ahead and get started here. Again, this is just how this stuff happens sometimes. Sometimes you got to improvise. I'm kind of glad that happened, actually. I can kind of go ahead and show you guys some styrene fabrication right off the bat here. So essentially, we want to match this bottom corner of the step here. This is the right size. Everything else is too wide, so we need to match that size. So essentially, I'm going to basically gauge this out here to that exact size. And I'm going to just straighten this out. There we go. And then I'll make a cut. So these are the steps after I've put them together with my 020-inch styrene strip here that's been cut to size. I basically created the frame of the step, and now I have some 010-inch styrene strip that I'm going to basically use as the backing for this step assembly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of super glue, and I'm going to basically make a decent little puddle here on a piece of paper, scrap piece of paper. I'm going to run the part through this glue and then basically attach it kind of sloppily to the styrene like this. And we're going to let this thoroughly dry before anything else. But essentially that will be our backing. So now we have essentially taken the step wells, installed them on the backing, and now they're pretty much ready to get the final step, and then they can be cut out and set aside. So after I've gotten the steps basically assembled here, I basically have them here cut out, separated them from the main part of the sheet, and I have them on individual pieces of plastic now. This one here has already been cut out and is pretty much ready to go. So as you can see, this is the main step. Okay, so for the most part, all this needs now is some fine sanding to finish off the edges, clean them up a little bit, and then they're pretty much ready to be set aside and ready for later installation. Obviously, I'm not going to jump ahead and reinstall these on the car now because I still got to do all the cutting on the sides, and it's parts like these that we can do ahead of time, but they need to stay off until all the major body work is done, otherwise we risk breaking them off. So this is going to be set aside, but essentially how you cut these out, you just have your main part of the sheet, and you essentially take the butt end of your, basically the heel of the blade. The sharpest part is the heel of the blade right here. You take this and butt it up to the part, and essentially you just cut around it. Relatively self-explanatory, but I'll just give you a quick demonstration of what we're talking about here. just cutting it out. See how easy that is though? And these parts only took about 20 minutes to make. Alright, so next up I want to go ahead and take care of a quick fix here on the sills related to the actual floor of the car. Here, as you can see, this is all one solid sheet of skirting. On the Walther's car, it's a broken up section of skirting. I don't know why they did it this way. Some of these cars had axle generators, but I don't know why they did a partial skirt. It's really dumb. There's practically no prototypes that ever had a skirt like this, so I don't know where they got the prototype information to do this, but whatever. We can fix this basically by grafting little bits of styrene in there. So in this particular case, I've taken some 0.20-inch bits of styrene. I've basically matched the shapes like these, cut the angle into them, and then trimmed them up, filed them, sanded them, cleaned them up a little bit, and I've basically cut them so that they fit into this little crevice. That way we can block these up. Later on we'll be able to sand them down, fill them in with putty, and we'll be able to blend the seam right in. You won't even know it was there. That's how easy this is. But this is a good example of what it takes to do some of this styrene fabrication. You know, you got to do a lot of planning ahead. You got to think about, well, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to create this? How am I going to do that? This is the kind of thing that you encounter in these kinds of projects. So it's why you really need to be prepared when you do a kit bash like this. So anyway, I'm going to take my tweezers. I'm using straight acrylated adhesive. I'm going to roll in my glue, and I'm basically going to pick up the car at an angle. That way I can guide it into the actual outside of the skirt. I want this to basically try to fit as snugly in there as possible. I want this to be right on the outside. That way it's sitting flush with the existing sill. And again, once all this dries, we'll be able to go back and sand this and blend this in with putty, and you won't even know it's there. But basically I'm going to repeat this process for all four. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and remove something real quick on the car body of this particular model, and that's the area where we removed the chimney. This chimney is in the wrong location. It's actually going to be swapped over to this side here in a little while, down the line a little bit, but we need to basically remove this little stump that's on the roof here. And essentially how you remove parts like this is to use a chisel blade. The idea is to essentially remove as much material as you can as slowly as possible. So in this particular case, I'm actually going to try to, I have an idea here. I'm going to see if I can use a pair of cutters to kind of nip at this a little bit. I want to basically try to slowly take some of this material off. I was thinking I could take these clippers and use that to take this down, but apparently I can't, so I'll just go ahead and just use the straight chisel blade, which is fine. I just wanted to kind of see that. But just remember, you're trying to preserve all this roof detail. You don't want to try to damage this, you know what I mean? So you're trying to be very careful, and it's kind of in a tight place. As you can see, I'm trying not to affect this panel line here and then the roof panel itself. So it's very, very tricky. So just kind of work at it if you can at different angles. Don't put too much force in it, and don't cut yourself. Just be very, very careful. As you get towards the ends, just kind of let off on the pressure a little bit and then lift up. Sorry, that kind of got out of focus. Essentially what I did was I took that top little piece off.